um, to continue talking about it.
Yeah. So
Maybe.
just to even get into it, we are about, I think we're live actually.
Oh,
So hello
okay.
everyone. And Hadar, I wanna actually allow you to really introduce yourself right now,
Mm.
because I'm just I love the work you do, and I think you can explain it even better than I can. So you have the floor. Tell the audience just a little bit about what you do, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me on here. It's always a great pleasure to talk about this topic that I think so many people are struggling with right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually started working as a social worker. I had my first position um,
Mm-hmm.
right after grad school. Um, at a clinic that
Yeah.
saw different types of clients, and it was pretty diverse. And I remember having my first client that struggled with substance abuse, and
Mm-hmm.
he was just I just thought that he was fascinating. Um,
Mm-hmm.
he was, really really smart individual. He had, some time being incarcerated.
Mm-hmm.
Was really living this intense, interesting life, trying to go back to being a student. I
Oh, I
didn't.
can identify with that.
Yeah.
That's such a hard process, especially if you're coming from a place where you're trying to just get your bearings straight. Because I feel like when you are addicted, it just kind of sort of really sucks you in a bit, that it's a vicious cycle, from my person. So that's really inspiring that he was actually, I can identify with that. But please continue. Was that something
Yeah,
that just spoke
absolutely.
to you and you said, this is where I want to dedicate myself, my time, my worth to, value, everything?
At the time, I didn't know much that I was going to go into it, but I really enjoyed working with the client, and I know that one of the things that he struggled with was, is this something that I'll be able to do,
Mm-hmm.
or is the cycle going to come back and get me?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then a little bit after that, after this experience, I decided to do something full time, and ended up working at a methadone clinic,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then continued working with in the substance abuse field um, at a soap program.
Mm-hmm.
It took a little bit of time to work in a correction house, and doing some continued work in soap program, and a little bit of private practice. And yeah, it has been a journey.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it. I think the work you do is so wonderful, and I think you actually have to be very passionate and have that purpose and drive and empathy. I actually, in college, I really toyed around with the idea of going into psychology, but
Mhm.
it became too difficult, so I just stuck with the English. It was just an easier, much easier major than the psychological one, but turns out I still had to study it, to heal my mind. What is
Yeah.
what one of those things, I guess, what is you would best advice you would give someone that's struggling or going through this?
I'm going through this. Yeah, no. So a lot of the clients that I do see, sometimes they are clients that I've seen come around um, for years.
Hmm.
And and what recommendation I would give is, um, don't stop trying.
Yeah.
because we don't know, if it's going to be the first time of treatment that something clicks, or if it's going to be the seventh time.
Yeah.
And sometimes we do see people that it's the seventh time they've been struggling so long,
Mhm.
and then it's that one time that something makes sense, something is working, and that's when the big breakthrough is.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and another thing that I would say is that um, relapses.
Mhm.
Some individuals, see that as like an end all,
Mhm.
but it is possible to try to control the time, the length that somebody is relapsing.
Mhm.
And a lot of it's the mindset of, what, I can turn this into a 3-day lapse as opposed to a 3-month.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about the families? Because for me, that was always so I couldn't talk to my family, and that's
Mhm.
why I went through the process cold turkey, just because I felt so much shame. I was so ashamed to even just tell my parents, because it's like, well, I felt like I had almost murdered somebody or committed this horrendous crime that like I just have to live with. Um, so how, if I came to you with that, like what would be the advice you would give me? Because I feel like this
Mhm.
concerns everyone that's really struggling, because there's so much shame and guilt. It's almost,
Yeah, the shame and guilt is such a big part of that so many individuals experience, and I think that some of that is actually what keeps individuals in the cycle.
hmm.
And I'd love to hear more about your um, process.
Well, for me with the process, I just, if it was very slow and it was very gradual.
Mhm,
But what my breaking point was that I was just out of options.
mhm,
I didn't know how to seek out drugs, or I didn't know how to find them, because my supplier was my ex-husband. So I had that naivete. I never
mhm,
went on the streets, right? So
mhm,
when that break happened and the relationship
mhm.
ended and I just came to my parents' house, that was it. For me, that's it. I'm like, I can't
Yeah,
get anything. So yes, I
wow.
drank and I drank, and I was still on prescription medication. So that
Mhm,
helped ease
mhm,
off the whole methadone, heroin, whatever mixture I was on with my ex-husband.
mhm.
And then I had another thing where I lost my health insurance, so I had to come off the
Mm,
benzodiazepams, and that
wow,
was even worse, because
yeah,
that's when the seizures were happening, and it was pretty crazy. I didn't even realize that it was really the benzodiazepams having it, because I thought I went through the worst already with sort of
right,
the hair, and then that happened. And
wow.
again, for me, that was just even talking about it. I couldn't
Mhm,
talk about it for years. I did go, had a
mhm.
wonderful therapist I worked with for good 10 years.
Okay.
Um,
Mhm,
and a lot of it was just inner work, because by the time I even went to her, I had already been clean for 4 years. So when I started working with her, it was a lot of inner work and inner anger. And that's
mhm,
when I found out I had borderline personality disorder.
mhm, mhm.
And the main inner work began with that, because that was the issue. That was the anger. That was the
Mhm,
shame. And that was the hate, everything I was feeling, the self-hate, the self-loathing, the
mhm,
dissociation, all of it was um in that diagnosis, I guess, because I had every single
mhm.
symptom,
Wow.
from fear of
Mhm,
abandonment to
yeah.
childhood trauma that it stemmed
Wow.
from, to,
Mhm,
yeah. So it was, for me, it was a
mhm,
huge long process, and I
mhm,
don't think I would, anyone to listening to us right now,
mhm.
I would say, oh yeah, just you can do it all by yourself. No, that's because
Yeah,
it's
right, right. Yeah, no, I think knowing when and how to reach out and ask for help is such a big component about this. And then that's where, the shame and guilt ties in, right?
hmm
You're gonna have to tell somebody um, about what's going on, and maybe some family is gonna have to find out and get involved.
hmm
Um,
and
yeah.
that's just, I mean, I remember for me that was just so scary because I had already, you know, felt
Mhm,
so much shame just even from having a failed marriage. Uh,
mhm. Right, right. Yeah, one thing
and just
leads to
coming,
another.
it was just so many things, right, that
Yeah.
was just piling on for me. So yeah, when I do tell my story, when I do discuss it, it's just I
Mhm.
say, yeah, I made it, and hopefully you hear it and you say, wow, that gives
Mhm.
me, inspires me that I can do it. But you don't want to walk in the shoes I walked to get to the point, because it's a lot harder, and I feel like people can actually make it easier through therapy and um, treatment and support and the groups. I think we're finally having those dialogues right now, and that's why I'm so happy you joined us on Jess TV and Jess FM radio, um, to talk about this, because it is a topic that's not just affecting the US, it's
Mhm.
affecting Canada. As I just read, it's
Mhm.
opioid crisis is growing and growing, and it is not something that is going away. And I
Yeah.
think it's gotten worse from my experience, because
Mhm.
I never knew what fentanyl was. So I
Right.
went through
Right.
the generation of oxys, right? That was the
Yeah.
90s, upper middle class sort of
Right.
fun drug go to. And
Mhm.
that's what started me. And that's actually what started my ex-husband. So that was our bond when we met,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
it just progressed and progressed. And I honestly don't believe that anyone that's suffering from addiction can't have a healthy relationship, or
Mhm.
not be abused, or not be an abuser. Like, I feel there's like this vicious cycle that
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
works together. I don't, correct me. I don't want to go off on tangents. You tell me if how I honestly view what happened to me, because
Mhm.
it's still so hard for me to admit and sit here and say, yes, I've been, abused, or it was emotional abuse, and that was incredibly hard. It is, so because I continuously question myself if my memories are right, or maybe I was the one who was in it. What if I did it? What if I'm the bad person?
Mm. Yeah, no, I think, going there is tricky, and I agree that substance abuse does create a dynamic that fuels unhealthy relationships
Hmm
um, and dynamics. I think it's important to remember that what happens, and especially now, and I agree with you, things have changed, and maybe what used to be um, heroin and somebody um, um, being addicted to heroin is a lot different than the fentanyl that we have right now,
That
which
is so scary. See,
which is so
that
scary.
I didn't even enter. I'm so lucky I got out when I did,
Yeah,
and that I survived. And
yeah,
literally, I survived because I had an overdose. I was dead, and I survived. And so I can't imagine if I had stayed any longer, and if I had tried fentanyl, I probably wouldn't be here even talking to you at all. So that, what is your experience with what is going on now? Like,
yeah,
and I guess how bad it is, and
yeah.
what can we do to help as
Uh-huh.
communities, as people,
Mhm. Yeah, no, no,
as just
absolutely.
human beings, who I think really need to understand what is
Mhm.
happening from all aspects, not just the people who are going through it.
Yeah, and I think the community plays such a big role
Mhm.
in helping in the recovery process. I think first of all, it's important to understand that um, addiction to substances, it's It's something that is so strong that it becomes the number one priority um,
It is the purpose.
in someone's life.
It
You know,
is the
when
drive. It is the
yeah,
purpose. It is.
yeah, yeah, and everything, everything that used to be a priority, if it's family, even somebody's children, even the deepest connections, all of a sudden they're secondary.
Mhm.
To, food, things that we think
Mhm.
are essential for living, food, water, and the very, very basic needs, they become secondary to fulfilling the need of getting that substance. Um,
Yes.
and what happens, I
Yes.
think that it's important to understand what happens in the brain
Mhm.
when somebody's addicted. Just to have an understanding of, if you do know somebody, if you that need becomes so great. Somebody's been using for a while. That the substance, because the substance is providing so much dopamine in the brain,
Mhm.
it provides so much dopamine, more dopamine than the brain would ever have um,
Access to.
access on its own.
Yeah.
That all of a sudden, when somebody stops, the brain isn't used to making normal dopamine levels.
Mhm.
So basic functioning for that individual can become almost impossible or very, very challenging, at least in early recovery,
Mhm.
until the pathways of the brain can start to rewire itself
Mhm.
to be able to produce those dopamine levels and um, to feel enjoyment from um, enjoyable activities.
Yeah, I don't think I even had enjoyable activities at that time.
Mhm.
Um, so for me, what it felt like, I can explain, and I think this would coincide with exactly what you're saying, is that I couldn't even get out of bed to take a shower if I didn't.
Yeah.
It's like it was almost like a medicine. I needed to function. I couldn't do anything
Mhm.
else.
Right.
Um, yeah, and everything else just was completely secondary. The
Mhm.
need to sustain that feeling was primary.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely, and maybe the first time that you did it, it was such an amazing high, and maybe there were feelings
Well,
of
for me, I remember even in therapy always talking about it
mhm,
because I always said that my mind works a little bit differently,
mhm,
meaning that even um, so when I used, um, it calmed my body to such an extent that I felt like from my disassociation that I was almost back inside me, that I could
mhm,
have no, but I needed this to almost function and focus.
mhm,
Unless I used it to such an extent where I was, obviously like nodding off. But in small
right,
doses, I thought I had it
mhm.
completely under control.
Right, right, and I think so many people, eventually just need it to function,
Mm-hmm.
and then what happens is that, there needs to be maybe the first time is wonderful and great, but then greater doses are needed to reach that similar effect.
Well, I can definitely say with heroin, the best way I can
Mm,
explain it is that you get this high one time, and the
mhm,
rest of the time, you're just chasing that high that you'll never, ever
mhm.
get
Yeah,
back.
yeah, yeah,
Just
exactly.
never. But you want it so bad because that first time it was something.
Mhm,
And again, I was fortunate because I never used needles. So maybe that also helped me. And for anyone listening, I think it's also important to
mhm,
distinguish that I think needles make it, even for people who are shooting up, I think it makes it harder for them to get clean. Although, correct me if I'm wrong, I know they're extremes. And I remember my ex-husband, one of the nicest things
Mhm.
he did was actually not shoot me, shoot me
Yeah,
up.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've heard from a lot of people at once, you start with the needle, it takes it
That's
to
it.
another
And
level.
that's when that's when you, like he used to say, that you just turn
Mhm.
into a pickle and you can never be a
Yeah.
cucumber. And I
Right.
wonder if this is almost like a rehab thing, because again, I've never
Mhm.
had rehab. Um,
Right.
Even with my relationship with him, he had rehab. I was never, not even to his family, to nobody. It was almost like he kept me in this little world where I satisfied his needs and he got me my drugs and we coincided.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to keep isolation
Yeah,
is
complete. So he had his family and everybody, and I had nobody. So it was really, I lived in this one little bedroom, even though we had an apartment. He had a wonderful family home. Um, I hid and I used, and that's how I got to live inside my head.
yeah.
And that was really an escape for me, because later, after um, I healed my BPD, as I like to say
Mhm.
it, I believe
Mhm.
you can heal it, and I think you can love yourself, and
Mhm.
that works too.
Yeah.
But that's a different conversation.
Mhm.
Um, I was diagnosed with autism plus ADHD, so
Mhm.
my brain is fun already.
Yeah.
And I guess because it was so much fun, when I would get high, I went into a different world of creation where I could feel, and it was just a world, because
Yeah.
how I was living was just so isolated.
Yeah. No, no, I can imagine isolation, and sometimes we have that, we find that, "Oh my gosh, I finally found the answer," right? To
Mhm.
feeling good in my body, to feeling like who I'm supposed to be.
Or the pain is gone,
The pain is
the
gone.
anxiety, the whatever
Mhm.
it is,
Yeah, yeah. For a little bit until
for a
it
little bit until it comes back. I mean,
yeah.
for example, when I was prescribed, when it started with the Xanax for my anxiety attacks,
Mhm.
and I was about 18, it was my primary care doctor who put me on it. She said, "Yeah, Xanax is great. It's going to help you." And, I trusted her because I've seen her since I was 9, 10 years old. This has been
Mhm.
my doctor for God knows how long. And I tried it and I was like, okay, this works. This is helping the anxiety attacks.
Mhm.
But then after 4 hours, I was like, I'm getting it worse.
Right.
So then I went on to different medication. I went onto Klonopins, and that had more of a time release
Mhm.
effect on me. But even still, I was on these medications for about 10 years,
Mhm.
and continuously increasing. So by the time I was off, and when I had to do the whole cold turkey, I was
Mhm.
at 6 milligrams a day of Klonopins.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah, no, and
And I
those,
was functioning. And that
yeah,
is so crazy to
yeah.
even admit right now, because I hear
Mhm.
myself saying these words to you and I'm thinking, wow, that's crazy. And I hope anyone who's actually going through this too also hears it, because you're obviously not alone. And I know I'm not the only one who's this happened to or has been. It's just increasing and increasing the
Mhm.
dose, and because you always want to just feel good again.
Yeah, yeah, and what happens is some individuals reach a point where they just needed to function, to get up in the
Hmm.
morning um, and 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 feel like they're functioning, and yeah, and some medications are, like, benzos, they're not meant to be taken long term.
No, definitely not. Definitely, I
Yeah,
learned that one.
yeah, um,
So, what would you? Um, I guess, what would you say to families who see their, child going, or whoever, somebody close to them, and they're going through this? What would you say? And I'm really curious to hear what your professional advice would be, because so many people say, "Oh, shut them out,
mhm,
cut them off completely,
mhm,
let them learn their lesson." and that's the way to deal with it. Others say, no, you need to be supportive, you need to be there, you need to
Mhm.
do this and that. What
Yeah, so family members is tricky because I know that especially now with the fentanyl, family members, it really is hard to be the one struggling, and it's really hard to be the family member who um, is out supporting and waiting and um, hoping that right, trust is continually broken. Yeah. Mhm. Right. Yeah, yeah. So remembering, right? Always keeping in mind that addiction hijacks the brain, right? The
Mhm,
part of the brain that makes decisions. And again, remembering that when you have that number one priority, everything else is secondary.
mhm,
Um, that's what's going through that individual's mind a lot of the time. That it's almost like walking in a desert for 2 days and finding a glass of water and you're willing to do anything. And for
mhm,
you, it in the body, it can feel like this is life or death
mhm.
for that
It
individual.
really does, yeah, it does.
So really keeping in mind, the family. So I recommend, first of all, the family educates
Mhm,
themselves. There's so many family members that I hear that, they don't get it. They don't get it. So that's the first thing, and kind of familiarizing themselves with what's going on for that person. While also keeping in mind that it's not easy to be the family member. And
no, yeah,
and with the broken trust, with not understanding why can't this person just stop? How many times, you've been to treatment, you should be
mhm.
good now, right? Or um,
Should have learned your lesson by now.
yeah, I should have learned, how much more needs to happen
Mhm,
before you learn your lesson. And also just knowing that sometimes it's easier for them to distance themselves because they don't know what to expect anymore. And with the fentanyl, there's so many deaths too.
that
So
yeah, the fentanyl is just terrifying. I think it's they really I feel like with each decade, the drugs just get worse and worse,
yeah,
where it's just I don't know, how do we even deal with that? I have no idea, honestly.
yeah, no,
Um,
it's tough, and then you're right, it keeps on getting worse, and um, yeah, no, it
it's
keeps
tough
evolving. Hmm.
and it's scary. And I really do think we should be, really having these conversations. And again, I really
Hmm.
thank you for being here on Just TV. This is Borderline. And for anyone who's tuning in, I'm Diana here with Hadar, who's a licensed social worker with an expertise in substance abuse and recovery. And
Hmm.
we're here talking about the opioid crisis and any suggestions Hadar can have um, to provide a better perspective, I guess, for people who are going through this, and especially families who
Yeah.
are struggling
Hmm.
in this department. Because from from my perspective as an addict, I think
Hmm.
the shame and the guilt of turning for help,
Right.
especially within families, is just so tremendous. And I think that's completely universal
Hmm.
in every single addict's life. It's the shame because
Hmm.
there's so much of it. You do
Yeah.
feel a lot as an addict. There's so
Yeah.
much that you feel so much that you go out and use some more to not feel, but then you feel even
Right.
more.
Yeah, no, it's a cycle, right?
But
Because
how do you explain that to a family member? How, I never could. I didn't, I'm sitting there and being like, they're saying, you're doing this, you're hurting us, you're horrible. And I'm like, yes, I'm horrible. And nothing's coming out of my mouth. I can't speak for
right,
myself because I already feel that guilt, that
right,
shame. And at the same
mhm,
time, I want to say, just love me, please. And it's just
right,
so hard. So, what
yeah.
is the advice
What
from
what
your
would be
perspective? From,
yeah. So from my perspective, if families, or if, the individual can, start off by educating the family what it is like to be an addict, to have those emotions, remembering, um, again, with the priority and the feeling of life and death,
hmm
um, and even maybe if somebody, it's a hard time, right, to maybe tell your own family, if somebody in the field is willing to educate,
hmm
I think that's really helpful too. Another thing that, I've noticed too about individuals suffering with addiction, connection and community,
hmm
um, plays a big role in it.
Yeah.
Um, and even though, and then there is this thought about, addicts need tough love.
hmm
And once they reach rock bottom, they'll know.
hmm
Um, and I find for those individuals, we always think there's a rock bottom, but it can get so much worse each time.
Yes.
Um, yeah.
I mean,
So
seriously, with
mhm,
me, and I'm sorry, I'm interjecting here, but I just had to say that. I felt just really lucky because I had such limited knowledge, and not everyone's that fortunate because I was just, like I said, like I was just a little trophy kept in the bedroom given drugs. I never had to search or reach out or go on the street. So I was way too scared. Like that was my rock bottom. That I'm too
right.
scared, and that's it. Like
Yeah.
it's really and I'm really surprised because when I had it or when I really wanted it, I didn't think that was rock bottom. Me overdosing, I didn't even think that was rock bottom. It was that weird fear that I was like, that's it.
Yeah.
Done. And maybe even fear of my parents finding out. I don't know, but that was just that's it.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, and everybody has a different rock bottom, and I'm glad that
Yeah,
you
and I feel like I
go
was.
out.
That's what I wanted to say is that not
Mhm.
everyone is as lucky as me. Where I really, it was just so much bad was already happening that it was like, okay, I
Mhm.
give up. I can't. Like I just can't.
Yeah.
It was just has completely losing a home I thought I had to deportation to God knows what else, and I
Wow.
almost feel like it was guardian angels, like the
Mhm.
universe being like, this is your rock bottom. We're gonna take everything, we're gonna pull it from under you, that you
Wow.
just don't know what else to do. Like you're just gonna have to kind of get your brain functioning if you want to make it through.
Wow. Yeah.
Which is,
No.
and I assume for everybody, they all have, there's a different rock bottom that's reached
Mhm.
or a different type of healing because people are all different. I can't imagine
Mhm.
someone who also had addiction might have a similar story of how it felt to use, but
Mhm.
different people, they for different reasons and so on. Do you think there's a link between a mental health illness like a borderline personality disorder and substance abuse, or do you think they're separate?
Absolutely. So most of the individuals that I've met, first of all, I think that substance abuse for most individuals, is a symptom
Hmm.
of something else.
Yeah.
Um, there, so many, and maybe they don't even know at the time. Most of the individuals that I've worked with, it was a symptom of something else.
Hmm.
A lot of it was trauma. And
Mhm.
in my observation, trauma and attachment, I
Mhm.
think were big um, components that I found related to substance abuse.
Yeah.
The yeah, yeah. And for a lot of people, they go through life, they have something happen that, and that time they put that drug in their body, it's all of a sudden a relief. So it's hard to blame somebody for wanting to feel better. Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, so really quickly, going back to the families, I think,
Yes, yes.
right, recommending, to educate yourself, even if it's through a social worker or a counselor or
Mhm.
a professional. The other thing that I believe that, we do talked about the tough love. I actually believe considering that connection is such a big part of recovery
Yes.
that, support is provided by family.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's such a big part of the recovery and it's such a motivator, with boundaries, of course.
Mhm.
But that is what I think has been most helpful to the individuals that I've worked with.
How would you even say an individual can, well, families can form boundaries if so much trust has been broken, right? So
Mhm.
can they say, "Oh, well, how do we know if we say this, they're still not going to do this again, or our boundaries are not being respected because trust is broken?" So, what would you say in that regard
Mhm.
to
Right.
a family member?
Yeah, and that's a tough one. That really is a tough one. And I think maybe starting by, I think it depends what the boundary is, but
Hmm.
maybe if the individual, is someone that, you know what, you can't live with us.
Hmm.
Like, I'll support you, I'll come visit you. I won't give you money,
Yeah.
but I will come visit you.
Hmm.
Or I'll call you. Or um, really slowly adding more. But I think being there for the support component
Hmm.
is um, the important part, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No. Yeah. The support.
Mhm.
It's it's already lonely in the realm of addiction, not in
Yeah.
just that shame and that guilt.
Mhm.
So, and if you come out and you say, "Hi, I need help," and then there's more shame and guilt,
Mhm.
then that just
It
feeds the cycle more. Well,
yeah.
I noticed with me that just would feed because I'm so ashamed, but then you want me to
Mhm.
focus, but I need this to focus. So I don't, what do I do?
Right, right, and
You
especially
want,
in early
you
recovery,
don't
right?
want to
All the
see me hurting, but
Mhm.
you want me done, but how can I be when? So it gets really confusing. And so, what would you say to the person that's going through it? So, if taking the first steps to telling the family or telling the people you love, "Hi, I'm dealing with this crazy
Mhm.
thing. I need help," which is so hard to say.
Right.
Those words are extremely, for anyone that's struggling. Oh yeah, very hard words.
Yeah.
What would you say? How could they approach
How can
that
I
barrier? How do they even overcome
Mhm.
that barrier?
Right. I actually do think that it depends on the family too.
Hmm.
Sometimes maybe asking for help, maybe the first person isn't the family.
Yeah,
Maybe it's somebody that you think will understand.
yeah.
Maybe it's a professional, maybe it's somebody in NA or AA or
Hmm.
and family. I think that, the situation is what it is.
Yeah,
You're probably gonna find out anyways at some point.
yeah.
Um, and maybe trying to find the best way to educate them. And I actually have a question for you
Oh, sure.
about this. What do you wish your family, what do you wish their approach would have been? What do you think would have been most helpful for you from your family at the time?
I think support and understanding,
Mhm.
that would have been really helpful just to get through the process because
Mhm.
my family had such a negative notion with it. It was just so terrifying for them, right?
Mhm.
It's just, even culturally, just
Mhm.
terrifying. It's not
Right.
something they were ever equipped for. And
Mhm.
honestly, I would need different parents to for some. Does that? I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
I wish there were, more supportive where we could sit down and have these discussions. That would have been amazing in my healing. I wish they started trusting me sooner, or we discussed
Mhm.
boundaries, or we actually
Mhm.
had open conversations about how are you feeling, what do you need, in a sense of physical, because there's so much physical that happens in the first, I want to say, first month or so of
Mhm.
completely withdrawing from something.
Absolutely.
Um, and that's when support is needed. And I also want to say that my sister was there for me. She was my
Mm.
supporter,
Mhm.
but we're 12 years apart. So I
Right.
scarred my sister through a lot. And she did see me have the grand mal seizures, and she was there for me through that. But
Mhm.
she didn't have support either.
Mhm.
So there stems
Right.
another, more
Mhm.
trauma. And I'm always curious how it's fine. This is how we were learning. So for
Mhm.
next generation, I want to do better, right?
Right.
So even with my daughter, I know there's going to be
Mhm.
times where drugs are going to be discussed. And I'm going to have to prepare myself for topics that are
Mhm.
going to terrify me because right now,
Yeah.
to me, drugs are the scariest thing in the world.
Mhm. Right. Right.
And even some medications, just all of it, because whew, I'm
Yeah.
terrified of when she reaches teenage years. I really am. I don't.
Yeah. No,
Like
it's
you
terrifying.
do as a therapist, and I don't know,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Mhm.
and oh, I just scared myself just thinking about it.
Yeah.
And
No,
so I
it's
can
you're
imagine other parents who, or even parents who are listening to this, who are in
Mhm.
it, or have a teenage child who they're seeing is
Mhm.
using or doing something. What would you say to those parents that are suspicious of their, teenage child? I was shamed a lot. So I would say
Mhm.
that doesn't work. But what would you say as a professional?
What would I say? I think this is so tricky, and there isn't, one way of doing it, and it's such a scary place to be. I think
Yes.
especially with where we are today, where we're heading, even just having, um, fentanyl laced in things,
Yeah.
right? Maybe not doing heroin, but, um,
Something laced with something. I mean, I
Yeah.
think fentanyl is just completely just terrifying. That even
Mhm.
when I heard about it, that
Yeah.
initially it just freaked me out.
Mhm.
Like that was another extra layer.
Right.
Like,
Yeah, now there's the xylazine and, um, yeah, I think, in my opinion, and this depends on the family, but I think creating a space and a dynamic
mm-hmm,
where there is openness,
mm-hmm,
where the child knows that no matter what, um, my parent will help me.
yeah,
Um, I think that's, creating that environment where there is openness, there is,
mm-hmm,
um, maybe less judgment, that can facilitate, hopefully,
yeah,
a relationship where they can come to you.
Mhm.
as a parent and tell you if anything is going on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and those
trust.
mhm,
Because my daughter and I are just still working on trust. It
yeah,
starts so young, where it's an establishment that starts at such a young age. And I even noticed with her because she's always questioning me.
mhm,
And why should she even trust me or my view? Never mind that I'm just older and
yeah,
that should be it. She wants
mhm,
to know why. And so I noticed the more me being open with her, the more she becomes
mhm,
open with me, and the less I don't impose judgment or I'm not mad, the more understanding and the more she's willing again to
mhm,
share.
to share.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not an easy place to be. And sometimes, like, really even, sharing your story as a parent,
Hmm.
I think it does so much, for the kids, um, them, kinda learning through your experience, right? They don't
Yeah.
have to do it themselves, and
No.
mhm, you hear about it a lot, like, a lot of kids, that, do talk about it with their parents,
Hmm.
um, parents that have gone through it. A lot of them are very cautious and
Hmm.
aware, and, that's something that, can help prevent them from doing that as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I want to say we only have like a minute left.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Okay, quick.
yeah. Do you have any last remarks, last suggestions? I think this 45 minutes was it was so valuable to me, just even hearing you and just hearing my beliefs just being reaffirmed, which is
Mhm,
really nice. Like it's still a part of a healing process. I like to believe that I'm continuously
mhm,
healing, learning, and growing. I think we all are. Um,
mhm.
so
Yeah.
anything you would say to people who are listening, who are just even tuning in into the opioid crisis, and to others, what would your best advice be?
Yeah, so my best advice, and I know, you know, there's a lot in depth to go, but I'll summarize it. Is that in my opinion, for the most part, substance abuse disorders are a symptom.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, really healing in the long term will probably need to be done with treating the original causes.
Mm-hmm.
So I would advise to maybe get a specialist, maybe a trauma
Mm-hmm.
specialist, for those struggling with trauma to really try to heal those.
Mm-hmm.
Another aspect is connection, right? Feeling isolated, feeling like you're the only one that's going through it. Working on relationships, working on balance once somebody is in recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Making sure that they're sleeping enough, eating enough, um, managing stress.
Mm-hmm.
I think is also an ongoing helpful aspect to be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the other aspect that I think that I'm noticing and I'm getting a lot from you is how we choose to tell our stories.
Yeah.
And I think that makes a big difference in how we see ourselves and our ability to accept and to
Yeah.
move forward and not to get, stuck in that cycle of shame and guilt. And then
Yes,
because
that
of shame
is
and guilt.
such a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
I'm honestly, I'm just so happy to be free of it.
Yeah.
It's really nice. I like my present life. It's a good
Yeah.
feeling. So for anyone that's really
Mhm.
trying and think like, oh, I can't do this. I've been there. I felt it.
Mhm.
I didn't think I could do this. I honestly never thought I'd actually be sitting in this position and having a conversation on air and not um, internally dying of shame and fear of public speaking and so on. So it's really you can get to that place. I never thought it was possible when I was going through it.
Mhm.
So, but I can now, in a place where I can say, well, yay, it does work. Like this
Yeah.
is a good place. Trust your therapy, trust the process,
Mhm.
trust the progress,
Right.
take responsibility, take the accountability. When you're there, you can do it. And
Mhm.
I really just want to, I think we should conclude this with the words of Maya Angelou when she said, do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better. And that was really my healing mantra for a
Mhm.
while. And it still really is, because I use it for really anything, because I have learned. So now I know I can do better. And now I know I can be better. And I value my better.
Wow, that's such a good mantra, and I think you're an example
Oh, thank
that
you.
it's possible. It's possible
It's
to come out of
possible.
the other side, even when it
Yes.
feels like it's impossible.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for giving us your time, have sharing what you shared, and have a great night. And for those who are listening, thank you. Thank you for tuning in. This is Borderline on Jess TV and Jess FM in Canada. And we air on NCG Television, Roku TV, Apple TV, and Facebook Live. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great night. Thank you, Hadar.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.